How and why tipping culture got so out of control. There was a time when tipping felt simple. Someone took care of you. The service felt personal. Maybe the server remembered your name. Maybe they went above and beyond in a way that felt human and thoughtful. At the end of the experience, you left something extra, not because you were told to, not because a screen suggested it, but because you wanted to. It was a quiet acknowledgement. A small gesture that said, "I noticed the effort." But somewhere along the way, something changed. Today, tipping doesn't feel quiet. It doesn't feel optional. And it rarely feels simple. Now, before the service even begins, a glowing screen turns toward you. It suggests 20%, 25%, 30%, sometimes even more. A worker may be standing right there while you decide. The transaction doesn't move forward until you press a button. The moment stretches just long enough for you to feel it, and tipping no longer appears only in restaurants. It shows up at coffee counters, at bakeries, at self-checkout kiosks, on pickup orders, in mobile apps, in places where no one waited on you, no one refilled your drink, and no one brought food to your table. So this raises a bigger question: is tipping still a reward, or has it quietly transformed into a surcharge we're expected to pay no matter what? Because for a growing number of people, tipping no longer feels like appreciation. It feels like obligation, and many are getting tired of it. So how did we get here? Let's break it down: the restaurant industry and the birth of modern tipping dependence. To understand how tipping culture spiraled, you have to start with restaurants. That's where the modern tipping system took root, and where it became deeply embedded in wage structures. For decades, restaurants in North America relied on a legal framework that allowed them to pay servers below the standard minimum wage, assuming tips would make up the difference. Instead of treating tips as a bonus, they became part of the compensation structure itself. This wasn't accidental. It was normalized. Over time, customers were conditioned to understand that tipping wasn't just generosity, it was how servers survived. The logic became: restaurants set menu prices, restaurants pay low base wages, customers fill the gap through tips. Restaurants positioned themselves as intermediaries. They controlled pricing, staffing levels, and working conditions, but they shifted part of the payroll responsibility to customers. Most diners never saw the math, they just learned the ritual. You tip because that's what you do. You tip because that's how servers make a living. You tip because not tipping feels morally wrong. And slowly, what started as optional appreciation became an expected supplement to wages. How tipping spread beyond hospitality. Originally, tipping made intuitive sense in hospitality settings: hotels, sit-down restaurants, bars, travel services. In these environments, service is part of the experience. Attention, comfort, personalization, these are built into the interaction. Tipping felt aligned with that, but over time, the practice expanded. Coffee shops adopted tip jars. Fast casual chains introduced digital tipping prompts. Pizza stores added suggested gratuities for pickup. Then delivery apps changed everything. Instead of leaving a tip afterward based on the service, customers were asked to tip before the service even happened. In some cases, drivers could see the tip amount before accepting the order. Tipping became integrated directly into the checkout flow, and once the technology existed, it spread. Self-service kiosks began asking for tips, automated counters began prompting for gratuities. Even minimal interactions, transactions lasting less than a minute, now include suggested percentages. From a business standpoint, it makes sense. If customers are already conditioned to tip in one environment, extending that behavior elsewhere increases revenue potential without raising listed prices. Digital systems make it easy, just add a prompt, but from a customer standpoint, the meaning of tipping started to blur. What exactly are you rewarding? Effort, speed, politeness, or simply the existence of the transaction? Without clear boundaries, people default to tipping anyway, often to avoid feeling uncomfortable. The psychology of the tipping screen. None of the biggest shifts in tipping culture didn't come from policy. It came from design. The digital payment screen changed everything. In the past, tipping often happened privately, cash left on a table, a number written discreetly on a receipt. Now, the prompt is immediate and visible. The worker may be watching. The suggested percentages are pre-calculated. Sometimes there's no clearly labeled "no tip" option. Instead, you see 20%, 25%, 30%. Custom opting out requires extra effort. Psychologically, this matters. Behavioral economics shows that default options strongly influence decisions. When higher percentages are pre-selected or prominently displayed, they anchor expectations upward, add social presence to the equation, the subtle awareness that someone might see your choice, and the pressure increases. Many people tip not because they felt exceptional service, but because they want to avoid appearing cheap or inconsiderate. The choice technically exists, but it doesn't always feel voluntary, and that shift, from voluntary appreciation to socially pressured obligation, is where tipping culture began to unravel. Inflation and the escalation of expectations. Then inflation entered the picture. As menu prices rose, so did suggested percentages. A 15% tip that once felt generous began to feel inadequate. Screens began recommending 20% as standard, then 25%. Sometimes 30%, because tipping is percentage-based. Inflation automatically increases the tip amount. Higher food prices mean higher tip totals, even if the service didn't change. Customers are facing higher base prices, higher suggested percentage, more frequent tipping prompts. At the same time, wages for many customers haven't increased proportionally. This creates frustration. Workers, on the other hand, face rising living costs too. Many rely on tips to bridge income gaps. They feel the pressure when customers reduce tipping. So both sides feel squeezed. Customers feel overburdened, workers feel financially unstable, and businesses continue to benefit from a system where labor costs are partially subsidized by customers. Service fees, hidden charges, and growing confusion. As if tipping weren't complicated enough, service fees entered the equation. Some businesses now add automatic gratuities, include service charges, add employee wellness fees, impose kitchen appreciation fees. Sometimes these fees replace tipping, sometimes they don't. Sometimes customers are expected to tip on top of them. The language varies. The distribution varies. Transparency varies. Customers are left guessing who actually receives this money. Is this fee replacing a tip? Am I expected to add more? When clarity disappears, trust erodes, and when tipping feels like a hidden surcharge rather than appreciation, resentment builds. The North American model is not universal. One reason tipping culture feels confusing is that it isn't universal. In many countries, service workers receive stable wages, menu prices reflect labor costs, tipping is rare or reserved for exceptional cases. There is no moral anxiety at the register. No mental math. No silent judgment. By comparison, the North American system places customers in a constant decision loop. How much is enough? What's standard? Will this offend someone? For travelers and newcomers, this can feel overwhelming. It also highlights something important. Tipping culture isn't purely about service quality. It's about tradition, conditioning, and economic structure. The emotional toll, tipping fatigue. There's a term emerging more frequently now, tipping fatigue. It describes the exhaustion people feel from constant tipping prompts and rising expectations. It's not that people suddenly became selfish. It's that the emotional weight of carrying a wage system at every transaction adds up. When every purchase includes a moral decision, even small ones become draining. And when something feels obligatory rather than voluntary, its emotional meaning changes. Appreciation turns into obligation, gratitude turns into compliance. That's the tipping point we've reached. Where does it go from here? Until underlying wage systems change, Tipping will likely remain embedded in North American service culture, but conversations are growing louder. Some advocate for eliminating tipped minimum wages, raising base pay, increasing pricing transparency, removing automatic percentage prompts. Others argue tipping still empowers customers to reward excellence. The debate continues. What's clear is this: tipping once symbolized gratitude. Today, it often symbolizes tension, and unless clarity, transparency, and fairness improve, resentment will continue to grow quietly beneath everyday transactions.